The Little Nightmares series, developed by Trazier Studios, are some of my favourite horror video games. The way I bring them up when they're completely irrelevant to a video topic has probably hinted at this. What can I say? I like what I like, and I like talking about what I like at every available opportunity. Dark Souls. Dark Souls. Sorry, there's something in my throat. Little Nightmares, if you don't know, is a game series about children trying to survive twisted realms born from nightmares, usually only doing so by the skin of their teeth, and as a series, it's relevant today because Reanimal is to the series what Dark Souls was to Demon Souls. Hey look, I actually brought that up kind of naturally. That being basically the same foundation, but done a lot better in most ways. Funny enough, I only have footage of the remaster of Demon Souls, not the original PS3 version, so anyone unfamiliar just has to take my word that Demon Souls, this beautiful game here, is technically the older, more outdated one. The last time we visited the nowhere of Little Nightmares in the third title, I didn't have a great time, and not in a fun horror way where I was uncomfortable and too nervous to move forwards. Little Nightmares 3 just wasn't very good. It looked like a Little Nightmares game on the surface, and in a few isolated moments it sort of felt like one, but I'm sad to say that it missed the mark for most of its runtime. I already could not remember most of it before Reanimal happened. It wasn't as creepy, it felt inconsistent with some of its mechanics, and our protagonists were clearly close from the beginning, so there was no underlying feeling of caution. And they had weapons from the starting moment which made them look and feel too competent at surviving a world that's supposed to hate them. The main thing about small child versus big scary world type games is that the underlying dread that should permeate the experience comes from us being tiny and not in control, only ever escaping death at the last moment or by taking advantage of the fact that the bigger monsters can't follow us into every hole we scurry into. Lo and alone were fighting back from the very start of the adventure, and that just felt weird. I posited the theory at the time that perhaps the mechanics were set up to reflect how we, the audience, due to the boon in popularity these sort of games have enjoyed, have ourselves become comfortable and feeling control over these games. We're not strangers to this setup anymore, and any new games trying to recreate the formula would have to do something different to stand out, yet still provide that feeling of being a bug in a giant unfeeling world. I now realise it was because Trazier, the original development team of the Little Nightmares series, didn't make Little Nightmares 3. That was all the work of Supermassive Games, and I feel bad that I didn't clock that originally. I feel like I've disrespected the original studio by making this mistake. No hate to Supermassive Games, I know they've made at least one game that people think is good in their time, but I also know this sort of horror isn't their usual wheelhouse. Thus we've now come to Reanimal, which has managed to recapture so much of that Little Nightmares feeling that 3 happened to lose. I rewatched my Little Nightmares 3 video whilst writing this script, and I should be honest, I didn't love that video. It was kinda bad. I tried too much to give the game the benefit of the doubt. I oversold how gameplay focused it was. I was kinda wrong about the specifics of the day 1 DLC. I even said that it felt like Little Nightmares a lot of the time, but then I played Reanimal before revisiting Little Nightmares 3, and wow, look at that, I was wrong. It was just wishful thinking. Reanimal launched earlier this year. I was gonna save it for Halloween, but I'm impatient and kind of obsessed with it, so it's happening now, in April. It was supposed to be in March, but apparently time just keeps moving. Did y'all know that? I welcome you, my friends, enemies, and all animalistic entities, to another review. I'm Ronica, I hope you're well. Today we're descending into hell to see what Reanimal has to offer, and we'll ask the question if it surpasses the original and manages to justify that 35 quid asking price. Ooh, that's a bit hefty. Before we begin, this game is, short. Its story is interwoven throughout the experience via suggestion, and some moments, well, I'd like to be able to critique and analyse them properly, but this will spoil them. So I'd say skip to the time on screen if you want a quick spoiler-free summary of the game experience. Yes, you will be skipping basically the entire video, but to be fair, it's an entire video of me talking, so it's not like anyone would blame you. Be sure to give the video a like if you end up enjoying it, leave a comment if you want, and subscribe for more of my stuff if that sounds like something you'd like. I do game reviews, game runs, and even first impressions sometimes, so if you enjoy that particular content, then I hope you'll hang around. Without further ado, let's begin where tradition dictates we must. Reanimal is a 3D horror adventure game in the same vein of titles like Little Nightmares and Bramble the Mountain King, which works for me since these are some of my favourite horror games. The setup will appear familiar to fans of this stuff. You control a small child in a dark, nightmarish world which is populated by things whose favourite daily takeout consists of small children. And looking at the sniffer here, I'm guessing it also pairs those with the kind of cheap kebabs that give you the runs at 3 AM, but that's a different kind of horror. The game does have a multiplayer feature, and after thinking about it, I've decided to to ignore it entirely, partly because I truly do not care about it, and I don't think that horror games like this really call for it, but also because I've already played the game through in single player, so I'd know all the solutions to the puzzles. If I played with another person, I'd either get me a partner that between the two of us we'd blitz the game, or I'd get frustrated with a clueless tag-along, both of which would undermine the intended experience. Either way, it's not the ideal way to go. I'm hoping this feature sods off in the future, but to offer two pieces of praise that I do have for the multiplayer section, you can do local co-op, which I can respect. Little Nightmares 3 didn't allow that, and with Reanimal you can play through the entire game with a person who only has the free demo version as long as they are playing the game with you. Again, I can respect that. It's like the online equivalent to the ancient practice of going round your friend's house to play video games. In an avaricious industry, it's always nice to see some studios say, yeah, but what if we just didn't do the worst thing possible? I can admire the approach, even as I question the need for this game to undertake it at all. I am a being of great contrasts. Anyway, onto the controls of the game. They're all very simple. The left stick is for player movement, as you can probably expect, and the right stick is for the camera adjustments. X is for jumping, triangle is for interacting with anything that has one of these little white prompts in front of it when you get close enough. Square starts out doing nothing aside from serving as a throw button if you happen to pick up one of the very few objects that you can actually hold. Later on, when you find a crowbar, it becomes your attack button. The standard melee is mostly reserved for enemies roughly the same size as you, whilst anything bigger will pretty much just flatten you. There is a single instance of you being able to fight back against a bigger monster with your crowbar, which comes towards the end of the first act, but most of the time if you see something huge you aren't meant to rush it. The game is clever about framing scenes to tell you without telling you that melee is inadvisable against certain targets. Great example, the giant pelican. Gross, I hate it. It chases you and lays waste to the wooden walkway that you're fleeing across, and there's never an organic moment to turn around and fight back, largely because your NPC partner is legging it forwards the whole time. Circle will de-equip your melee weapon. It also de-equips your light if you've got that out, which you produce by pressing R1. Holding R2 will allow you to sprint, which comes in very handy a lot of the time. Pressing L2 will make you crouch and sneak, which is a lot less common than you might expect for this sort of game. Pressing L1 calls your NPC partner over to you, which in single player I counted a grand total of 1 times I had to do this because the AI is competent enough to generally be where you need it to be, but thankfully, unlike Little Nightmares 3, the partner won't just solve puzzles automatically. You usually have to try them first for them to realise that something needs to be done. Final bits, the options button opens the menu where you can adjust the settings, exit the game, or see what masks you've acquired. There is no save function, but for a horror game I've come to accept this isn't necessarily an issue. Part of the tension for horror games can be making it to a safe point, and you'll know you're okay when you see this very small, very easily missable autosave icon in the lower right corner. They probably could have made that a bit bigger. I get that they're probably trying to be unintrusive, there are no other HUD elements in this game, but at the same time sometimes it is nice to just have that clarification, that certainty. Although then again the uncertainty does kind of play into the game, so I can't even really be mad about this. The game controls quite well. Like the standard of the subgenre, it's nothing remarkable for the vast majority of the adventure, but that's also not really a problem, because these games are more about the vibes and the atmosphere than the gameplay, which only really needs to be serviceable to not get a mark against it. You don't need a lot of mechanics to make a game nerve-rattling. You also probably don't want a lot of mechanics because the risk of bloating increases with every additional moving part, and there's a maximum threshold of how annoying or convoluted a horror game systems can be where they still contribute to that feeling of dread before they just get annoying to work around. A good point of reference is the game Iron Lung, which I'm also deeply obsessed with at the moment. Great game, great film, can't wait for the DVD. That game has you do like 4 things. You move a submarine, blindly I should mention, you can't see where you're going, you have to navigate using this thing, so there's not even any scenery to take in. You then turn around, you then walk to the back of the sub, and you then press the button to take a photo of whatever's in front of the sub. In any other game that would be almost lethally boring and make it worthy of being impaled, but the experience is greater than the sum of its parts because the sound design and that feeling of dread is so well crafted that extra mechanics probably would have started to detract from the experience. If there isn't a lot to do, then you can never be too distracted from the overwhelming feeling of oppression. You just have to sit with it and process the feeling. This is how I typically look at Little Nightmares type games. Their gameplay is never anything deep or thought-provoking. You'll get puzzles, but the games are mainly adored because their worlds, lore suggestions and vibes are all on point. Granted, some of the puzzles are just fun enough on their own and often make good use of environmental suggestion, but they're not the main thing. One of the biggest, most impactful things these games need to focus on is the atmosphere, which Reanimal absolutely absolutely nails. There is almost always a deep blue haze that's restricting your vision and makes the world seem almost uncertain, and what we can see of it reveals it to be in a state of disrepair. One level has actual sunlight, and it's eerie as all hell because it feels so wrong. It also leaves before it outstays its welcome and risks becoming maybe even a source of comfort. I've said before, and I'll say again, a good horror game can make even a well-illuminated room deeply uncomfortable. A major change Trazia made to Reanimal's visual style is the sense of scale of its world. The kids you play as don't feel quite as dwarfed by the world as, say, 6 from Little Nightmares did. These environments that we have to navigate originally seem to have been built with regular-sized humans in mind. There are still plenty of moments where, thanks to perspective and enemy size, or even just environmental layout, where we feel a lot smaller than we are, so that classic "this world is huge and hostile" feeling is still present, but this time the world is meant for things closer to our size range. That means when the large monsters show up, it looks more like they don't belong here, and I don't think that's a bad thing. They look a little extra wrong because of it. I should say that I love the design of the monsters in this game. The very first one, whom you'll remember as the Sniffer, is my favourite because it looks like a wrong human, which is one of my favourite genres of monster design. The way he unevenly stalks around, or I suppose staggers is more accurate, the creepy grunts, clicks and hisses he makes as he searches for us, his ability to drive and use laws like ice cream suggesting a higher thought process, and the way he crawls into bloated corpses to go elsewhere, it's all deeply unsettling and a fantastic opening creature. In my mind, he was the best thing for the game to start with, something vaguely familiar yet immediately wrong. The other monsters are mostly animal-based, like the giant pelicans, which I take issue with. Pelicans are already unpleasant gluttonous creatures with no fear of the Empress or sense of decency or respect. Thanks, Reanimal, we definitely needed a more upsetting version of the pelican. Who on your dev team woke up one day and decided this is what the world needs, and are they okay? What's next? A monster sheep? Oh, there is that. Is there no end to your depravity? I certainly hope not, because I love how you've designed your really nasty, upsetting creatures. They are fantastic. Even the weakest one in terms of visual disgust, the big spider creature, which looks a bit like No-Face from Spirited Away, which is definitely a little bit of a letdown since Creepy Spider as a design prompt could yield some much nastier results, as spiders are already hairy, venom-filled menaces to the animal kingdom that traverse the world on 8 erections. I'm just saying, there's a lot you can do with that. Even this is still a pretty good design, and I wouldn't want to be within 5 postcodes of anything that looked or sounded like this. The final monster is a giant sheep demon, and I just want to thank Reanimal for this clearly premeditated strike against my specific psyche. You managed to take an animal that I already find deeply unsettling and make it worse. Why are you like this? What? Sheep are creepy. Just look at them. There's something about them. I just don't trust them. What is going through their woolly little heads? I don't want to be left alone with one because I'm sure they're about to try something sinister and I just need to wait for there to be no other witnesses before making their move. I don't like them. I don't like this. I want it gone. Biff Treadwell, I finally fully understand your disdain for these fluffy nightmares made manifest. The lamb demon moves in such a grotesque manner, like its limbs are either broken or barely able to support its tremendous mass, and the way it bleats and shrieks, either out of pain or malice, all make it just that much more unpleasant to share a planet with. There are some other humanish monsters, like the skin suits, which are gross. They look greasy and like they'd smell of unwashed butthole, and they need to go away forever. Or these soldiers who scream and crawl at us as they blow themselves up with grenades, or just shoot themselves in the head. They're all just so rude. But in my mind, they'll never top the first guy. He was simply so much more unpleasant. Tarsia have always had a talent for making normalish things genuinely unsettling, so I'm glad they've kept that spark for Reanimal. These creatures look disgusting. They upset me to my core, and at least 2 of them have appeared in my actual nightmares I've actually had. So honestly, good job artists, sound designers, modelers and animators. I don't have any notes. Well, maybe a few for the spider, but again, it's not a bad monster design, it's just look what I have to compare it to. The level layouts are sort of where the game begins to falter. I won't say it completely drops, because these environments are equal part gorgeously bleak and interesting to explore. I mean, even just this small city street that we spend like 10 minutes in at most is absolutely dripping with atmosphere, and I adore it. It's the lack of humans in this human-made environment, that liminal space feeling thing, that I think hits a lot harder than even the previous Little Nightmares titles. Take the Pale City in Little Nightmares 2, still creepy as can be, still unnerving to exist within, and made all the worse by the faceless TV-obsessed residents. But it's clearly not made for humans, it's made for things similar to humans, but the scale and proportions of everything around us suggest that they're anything but. The city in Reanimal is for people, its more human scale makes it just a touch more unsettling, and because it's only here for a short part of the game, it lingers more in my mind. Again, no hate to the Pale City, I adore the setting, I just think Reanimals is also good, and in some ways it tops it, partly because of the brevity, we only spend a little bit of time here, and somehow, like I said, it just makes it stick a bit more. Honestly, this entire world feels so delightfully wrong, and we get to explore quite a lot of different places, like the children's boarding school, or the beach naval vessel, the creepy farm, the actual war zone including trenches and a deadly no man's land full of barbed wire and machine guns. That area was fantastic. One thing video games do a lot is trivialize many aspects of warfare, since violence is typically the language that many fun video games communicate primarily in. In most, not all, just most games where combat is a factor or where guns or other ranged weapons exist, you're not what I would call super incentivized to not get shot. Like, yeah, no damage is preferable to damage, but I don't walk with anus clenched knowing that at any moment I could be given a new extra large nostril by a thoughtful fellow with a rifle from over a kilometre away. Even in games where damage is significant like Elden Ring, I'm not afraid to get hurt. A Lindell Knight might pack a punch, but I have multiple ways to deal with that problem. A good shield blocks most of the damage. A ton of health minimises it if I do take an arrow to the bush. There are so many different healing tools and spells that you can use, and a decent weapon lets you retaliate without much issue. Thank you, Hand Ballista, you are the best thing and a big reason why I can't outright hate Elden Ring. The point is, most games where the player has the option of being murdered won't do any work to make you feel afraid of getting shot unless you're already low on health, but to be fair to most games, that's not really what they're about anyway. Reanimal though genuinely put me on edge and made me jump as I ducked machine gun turrets and dreaded every distant gunshot that was aimed for me. The sniper section made me afraid of getting shot in such an unsettling yet delightful way. It's a great sequence and hands down my favourite stretch within the entire game. You can't see who's shooting at you, you just know someone or something is. You get a half-second warning in the distant yet demanding crack of the rifle before a bullet tears its way through nearby scenery, and you just know if it hits you then nothing good is coming from it. I don't need another hole, the human body has way too many by default. And yes, I'm fully aware of just how privileged I am that I don't have to worry about getting shot in real life. Oh, also, great little detail to appreciate. Throughout the game you can find collectibles like concept art pieces, which were fantastic, you can view them in the menu, and masks that you, the player, can wear. They're basically the hats from Little Nightmares 2, just called something different. Now, for the most part, the masks don't do anything mechanically, they're just extra costume pieces that incentivize exploration. As we crawled through some trenches in the final stretch of the game, I find a discarded helmet. My first thought was, oh neat, another hat, we're just going to ignore the human tragedy that led to it being available. So I put it on and didn't think about it again. I didn't notice in the moment, due to the ambient noise of warfare around me, that the usual sound effect that plays when we acquire a new mask didn't play for this one. So I didn't clock that this was any different from any other mask. Then I get to the sniper section, and whilst moving down a hallway, a bullet ricocheted off the helmet, sending it flying and scaring the all-loving hell out of me. I then panicked more because I realised I was still alive and had very little time to maintain that truth. I loved this moment. This was a truly wonderful function of the hat. It's oddly generous of a game so bleak that the smallest mistake usually results in one less child and one more pair of angry parents, but it makes so much sense, and it's the sort of little touch I love seeing. It's another thing that I've said before and will say again, never underestimate how impactful the smallest detail can be to the experience. The game being strangely lenient of mistakes doesn't even end there. When melee combat becomes part of regular events, you don't usually buckle under the slightest pressure, you can survive a couple of taps before going down. There is one short stretch that does change this without any prior warning. You're in a dark room and now if one of these kids nabs you, that's it, you're done for. Which does the whole inconsistency thing that I'm not too fond of, but then again, the setup of the dark room and the various hints that these creatures thrive in the darkness probably should have clued me in that combat wasn't the approach when in their home turf, but at the same time the rest of the encounters with these creatures had all been in dark places, so yeah, it's not amazing. Maybe if we'd lost our melee weapons it might have worked better. The game really wanted to have one of those Little Nightmares moments where we have to sneak through the darkness and avoid the monsters, but it didn't bother to justify it properly. All it would have had to do was place a larger monster in the room that our melee weapons just wouldn't have worked worked against. There we go, now we have to sneak like you clearly want us to. I get the slight impression that the game kinda resents the fact that it's left stealth behind for the most part. Anyway, combat. Though that word is a little generous for what we see here. It isn't a frequent affair, or at least close quarters stuff isn't all too common, and it's not mechanically speaking very deep. It's press square until all hostile things are dead or fleeing, nothing else. No stamina or counters or timing to worry about, just madly swing your blunt instrument vaguely towards the bad guy, but that's fine because the game isn't about combat, it just happens to occasionally have some, and you could be forgiven for forgetting that it was a feature. I do somewhat question if its inclusion is a good thing, especially in a Little Nightmares spiritual successor. Of course, Little Nightmares 2 brought a pseudo-combat to the series, with you needing to hold something and swing it at just the right moment to take out a single enemy. Any mistake on your part saw your death, and the timing was super precise. Then 3 went further and added permanent weapons to the two protagonists, which they had from the opening minute of the game, and this is where it started to lose me. The characters felt too capable, and thus a lot of the horror was lost. And because one weapon was a bow with an endless supply of arrows to spare, the game just had to ignore you shooting arrows into any enemy that it had not designated as vulnerable. Keep in mind that the monsters of Little Nightmares were never immortal or immune to damage. Some of them had powers and a few were resilient to harm, but still an arrow to the eye should have at least taken away their sight. Instead, nothing happened unless the game said so. It was inconsistent. I hated it. Reanimal lets you have a melee weapon after you've proven you can run away and sneak effectively, and even then, they only work on the sniffer because he's clinging to the open window of a moving van, so battering his hand is a viable strategy since he's only really got the one to use and needs to hold on, so his focus is a little bit divided. Plus, in that moment, what else can you really do? The only option left is to swing when it's safe and just hope this works. No other large monster is weak to these, not the no-face spider, not the nightmare pelican or the final lamb demon. Those you deal with a little differently. For No-Face, in the arena that you fight it in, you'll see its kids throwing harpoons at you. You then throw those at No-Face when it charges you until you cause it to slither away and try to die elsewhere. The nightmare pelican, you outrun until it does itself in because of its own recklessness. The horrific sea monster, oh yeah, there's a giant sea monster as well that blocks the way forward, and it kinda reminds me of something out of All Tomorrows. You use a giant military cannon to clear the way. Yeah, that's certainly a way forwards. I admit I do like the big cannon as a solution. You see it earlier in your adventure, you can even enter the little interior and adjust the aim towards the large submerged critter thing, but you can't use it yet because it hasn't got any ammo. There are hints on the cannon island that a puzzle needs to be solved with the markings on these crates, but to get to said ammo, we first have to clear the farm and the boarding school and then solve the puzzle. It's nothing complicated, you just match these lights to the pattern you see on the crates, and then boom, ammo happens. Then you can loop back around to the gun by scaling down a cliff to finally rid the world of the sea nasty with a single powerful shot. I love this, I really appreciate looping level design, and I didn't expect to see it in a game like this. Well played, Reanimal. The soldiers you mostly just avoid, they have guns and grenades, and guess what you're not immune to? A couple of them you do get to blow up with an RPG because this is just the sort of game we're playing apparently, and then there's the lamb demon. Let me ask you, viewer, what do you think we do? Do we try to lure it into mines or sniper fire as it appears in the warzone? Is the answer more mystical, like do we have to find altars to weaken it, or maybe solve an intricate puzzle that utilises the environment and all we've learned about it until now? Perhaps we don't choose violence in the first place and realise this beast is merely in pain, either that or it's angry and terrified, so instead we need a gentle hand, because not everything has to end with something's death, and maybe, just maybe, through kindness we can earn our freedom from this nightmare. All interesting ideas, right? Now, scrap all of them. You use a tank. You use an actual functional tank that can shoot and drive through walls, and it's impervious to gunfire as displayed by these lovely soldier boys. Believe it or not, I'm not mad about this, even though it feels like I probably should be. At first glance, this entire setup is the antithesis to what these kind of horror games are all about. Tanks are basically video game shorthand for here's where the player gets to go nuts. For some reason, your kiddos have the know-how to drive a tank already. I kind of overlooked it for the ice cream van and the boat in the early game, but then again, as a child, I knew how a person drove a car, as in I knew which pedal did what thing and what gear changing is and why it was done. I didn't know how to drive a tank though. I hear from some people it's easier than you would expect. Maybe that's true, I truly don't know. Either way, even if we do just accept the kids know how to operate this thing because of reasons, then this section still sounds wrong conceptually. Here's the twist though, it's an exciting sequence and not completely void of tension. When soldiers with machine machine guns open fire, it's a shock, and the tank, whilst it won't break apart, still doesn't look like it can take too much punishment given the fact that we got a hold of it by yeeting a grenade at the thing. I'm impressed it's in working order. Then we have the poor visibility with that ever-present haze, so you basically have to wait for the gunners to strike first before we can effectively retaliate. And then the sound design with the sudden rat-a-tat of machine guns combined with the bullets deflecting off our hull, it's still sort of uncomfortable in its own way, and I love this feeling of power. But in a game like this, I'm always going to be somewhat on edge because I just know it's waiting to take it all away from me. Then Lammy the sheep demon happens, and it's huge and angry and coming right for us. Wow, that's deeply upsetting. I bet it could crack us open like an egg. Oh look, I was right. The chase scene in the tank is still nerve-rattling. It's fun, but also that lamb abomination is deeply unpleasant in all of the ways, and I hate it, and I want it to leave me alone. Please leave me alone. Please go away, leave me alone. No one even asked. It's a strange segment that, if done wrong, could really hurt a game, and I could see how for some people this could be too much for this sort of experience, but I don't think it was done wrong here. It still maintains some feeling of oppression without which games like this would shrivel and die. The atmosphere of this world doesn't stop bearing down on us as we navigate the ruins created through a conflict which we know nothing about. What this war is, who the sides are, the values of their people, nothing is clear aside from how disposable war makes human lives, which is a different kind of horror that I can vibe with. Honestly, this game has very few areas where I feel it warrants genuine criticism. That being said, let me now board the complaint train for a bit of a moan about the things that I think the game doesn't do very well and the mistakes I think it makes. Keep in mind, I considered precisely 0 of these to be deal breakers. I still love this game, I've played it through enough times to know that those feelings probably aren't about to change, but it's still me. I do enjoy a good moan even about stuff that I like. It's good for the heart, good for the soul. It's the one thing we Brits do that I'm pretty sure we didn't steal from somewhere else, but then again I'm wildly aware the only reason the moon is in the sky and not in a museum is because it was too big for us to nab at the time, so there is a chance that our attitude could also be pilfered from somewhere else. Also, I'd be hopelessly dishonest if I didn't admit that there were things that bug me and some areas where I feel the game just could have done better. Firstly, the most annoying thing I noticed, the prevalence of invisible walls. I've gone on at length in the past about how much disdain I have for this practice since it's immersion breaking and just lazy from a design point of view, so I won't rehash that all here, but by the Empress there are a lot of invisible walls in Reanimal that make exploring so tedious. The game does have secrets to find, but half the time I find myself with less desire to seek them out because I cannot pass through a solid chunk of empty space. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be exploring at this moment. I get not being able to scale every single pile of rocks. I get not being able to squeeze through every crack in every wall. Just as long as there is a reasonable obstacle in my way, I don't mind as much. Don't bait me with exploration, then slap me for trying to engage with the thing that you also actually want me to do, given that there are some story bits also squirreled away off the beaten path. It's not just hats and concept art. The game being linear isn't bad. Linearity on its own isn't a negative since some games hugely benefit from such structure, but a well-designed environment naturally funnels us the way it wants us to go without needing a damn force field. Secondly, I don't love how straightforward many of the game's challenges are. The game does have some good ideas, like this maze section where we're tied to our partner and need to carefully navigate without going too fast to avoid plunging us both into the abyss. Fantastic idea. We don't have our hands to use, and in this section we have to kick lights to illuminate our surroundings for brief moments. Both of these ideas are used once and not even to the best of their abilities. There's no timing the lights for the maze or memorizing the paths and the layout. It's kind of basic. It feels like this is meant to be the first in a trio of puzzles with how easy it is, and I love the visual detail that the floor is unstable, which is why we each have to take a separate path to begin with so as not to weigh one of them down. But then it's just over. That's such a shame. This was a wonderful idea and it deserved more breathing room. If or when we get DLC, I kind of hope we see some more like this. Then we have this underwater section where our movement is slower and heavier, so we have to mentally adjust to the reduced mobility, and the low light keeps us on edge the whole time. It's a great idea. Again though, it's used once and then it's done. It's over so fast I could have forgotten it happened. Something else that bugs me is the size of our party. Look at the amount of people on screen there are at any given time. Horror games don't have to fully isolate you 100% of the time to work, but it does help to have some moments where we're not accompanied by 4 other people. We expand our cast the more areas we clear, and it's not like each kid brings a mechanic or anything, they're just also here. By the midpoint of the adventure, we've got like 4 other people in our group who kind of do nothing. Story-wise, I get it, but it means we're never truly alone and we can't just sit and marinate in isolation. We've got a group, and even for an introverted loser like me, that does bring some sense of comfort in a scary place. If my boy Kinga has shown us anything, it's that isolation takes a toll on the mind and can leave you a mess. So it's a useful tool for a horror game to use, and failing at this very basic setup does bother me in a not insignificant way. Again, we don't need constant isolation, and story-wise, their presence, it does make sense, but gameplay-wise, it makes me feel a lot safer, because, you know, safety in numbers. That's literally used to our advantage in the final act as the sheep demon eats everyone except for us. And I dislike how some monsters aim exclusively for the player and ignore our NPC allies. Like, it would suck if they got gobbled up, but even just having a few failed swipes or attacks aimed towards them would go a long way to sell how at risk we all are. At least the Ash kids here can and will attack and kill either one of us, so that's a pleasant relief. Oh, what a normal sentence that was. The last few things that bother me is how the game handles interactions. Rather than us having a grab button and having to figure things out, we just pick up things that are marked as interactable objects, which feels like a step back. It's like this game has less faith in the player than the original titles, and look, I've been alive for the last 10 years. I get not believing in humans' ability to think even a little bit for a couple of seconds, but some gamers at least have part of their brain they save for problem solving. Also, the keys that we sometimes have to pick up to open doors are tiny and very difficult to see. It was a problem, well, maybe twice, nothing major, but just kind of annoying enough for me to want to bring up. I also don't love how our kids equip their lights automatically when entering certain dark rooms. Again, it's not a major issue, I just prefer to be in control of this because it means I can mentally weigh the risk of being spotted versus seeing where I'm going. The last thing I need to get off my chest is a bit awkward because it's not a problem anymore, but it did annoy me at launch, and regardless of the game state now, it should not have been released with this problem in the first place. In this particular section of the game that I'm showing on screen, upon dispatching the local Ash children, we're expected to crawl through this tunnel here to progress. Only in my very first playthrough, I couldn't do that because the game would not flag the passage to open, so I was stuck. I reset the game more than 10 times, I tried defeating the enemies faster, sneaking by them, then rebooting the entire console, but nothing worked. I was trapped in this room, no way forwards or backwards, and I was really cross about that. Luckily, a few days later, the team released an update that seemed to have fixed the issue, but it was a terrible impression to leave me with initially. My first proper playthrough of this game had to be put on hold because the game broke itself, and that's never fun to deal with. That has fundamentally altered my first experience with the game, and then when I replay that section now, I'm going to be on edge in the wrong way. It's good that it's been fixed, it should not have been an issue to begin with. This was a significant bug that literally made the second half of the game unplayable until it was mended. I would be lying if I said those bitter feelings weren't still lingering. Again, it was my first playthrough of the full game, and it ended abruptly because of something outside of my control, and that just feels awful. It's better now, it works now, that's good. Just, you know, should have worked before. I can handle not proceeding because I suck. I can't handle games that just don't work properly. I realise the hypocrisy in saying that when my favourite game is literally Fallout New Vegas, a game that doesn't work properly a lot of the time. Anyway, I think that's the majority, if not all, of the worth noting complaints. Other than these, the game is very well put together and provides a great adventure through a twisted hellish realm. It avoids overusing any single mechanic, and each monster is distinct and memorable, and the same is true for the levels. The gameplay is the smoothest I've ever seen for a Tarzia-style small world child versus... well, that was a vocal car crash. The gameplay is the smoothest I've ever seen in one of these Tarzia small child versus big scary world games. There we go. And I counted 0 times of the game failing to read my inputs, which made all of my deaths feel like my fault, and like I just said, I can 100% work with this. I might love video games, but I'm under no illusion that I'm any good at them. The monster sections are all exciting and tense, but I don't feel like any of them are doing the horror game equivalent of rubber banding. If you start running away from an enemy early enough, you should make it to safety, and if you screw up, you'll be the one paying the price. Also, the monsters that chase you don't arbitrarily stop for brief moments in the pursuit to make sure you escape and get to the next set piece, and seeing our characters backed into corners and have to fight back was interesting because it was done right. It was a last resort, an act of desperation, and often needed us to make use of the environment or an additional tool. We didn't go into this with a kill all monsters mindset, we're doing what we need to do in order to survive. All of the vehicles control in a way that makes sense. The boat is the most common one we'll use, and it controls how I'd expect a boat to control, with slight delays to stopping and starting, and the steering is a bit floaty, but yeah, it's a boat. It's meant to be floaty, an unfloaty boat is a bit more of a problem. The ice cream van was a bit awkward, but that wasn't really an issue. It feels quite top heavy, which makes some sense. It has to navigate these poorly maintained roads, so every bump and small jump feels like it could rattle the thing apart. It's the same problem we have driving down literally any road in the UK. Plus, it's clearly not meant to be controlled by tiny children, so it does have the right level of inelegance to be engaging without being annoying. The final tank was the most straightforward thing to move. It's a weapon of war with a reliable cannon that can punch through walls without issue. I didn't think vehicle sections should be in a game like this to begin with, much less a functional tank we could use to shoot stuff, but these are all used very well and make the game a lot more interesting. I really like Reanimal. I could joke that it's Little Nightmares named something else edition, but that's not fair because it's not just that, it's Reanimal. It's a lot like Little Nightmares, but put the two side by side and I could tell them apart. It uses the same basic foundation, it's got a lot of the same DNA, but it does its own thing. I left the playthrough with the usual feelings of what the hell and why the hell, always a positive for this sort of game, and after that one bug was fixed, I had no other performance problems. I was able to just play the game and enjoy the game. The graphics are solid, the art direction and music are all well suited to the experience being provided. The game is creepy and weird. I feel like I don't belong here and that this world low-key hates me and the monsters are nasty. In other words, it's exactly the sort of thing I want to see and feel whilst playing this game. It has some drawbacks, yes, but I still love the overall experience. This is what I wanted. This is what Little Nightmares 3 failed to be. It's the successor we deserve. Well, deserve is a strong word. We're humans, we're terrible. Then again, the game made me feel uncomfortable a lot of the time, so yeah, that's the punishment we deserve. Playing the game definitely gave me the willies, but a lot of that came from the story, which in the classic small child versus big scary world style is ambiguous as hell, but I also feel like it's going to be a bit easier to talk about since it's presented a bit more directly than former Trazier games. Of course, Little Nightmares 1, 2 and Very Little Nightmares all had stories that you could follow. It's just that Reanimal's narrative I feel is a lot more present, so let's have a look into this. It's time to discuss the story of this delightfully disturbing video game. Reanimal opens on this scene. We're down a hole of cum sort, that's supposed to say some sort, well done me, and several figures appear to peep at us. In total there are 5 heads, and my initial thought was that something was a little bit wrong with the final one as it appears, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I think the way the colour palette starts to shift as they arrive. I didn't know. Already this opening has left me with several questions, as is tradition of this breed of game, and I am 100% down with this. We then cut to Boy in boat. He has no given name. In fact, none of the 5 children do, so I'm going to call him Jax. He seems startled by his awakening in this boat, but quickly leaps into action and starts driving it around, which we just accept that he knows how to do. We follow these boys with their glowing red lights for a while. We have to, there's an invisible wall penning us in, until we see some seagulls attacking something in the water. Jax, being the good little egg that he is, goes to check it out and finds Girl, who we'll be calling Pomni. No, I joke. If I don't stop myself now, this whole video will just end up being a massive amazing digital circus reference, which I'm fine with, but like, that's not the point of it. It's a good show though, I would highly recommend it. Anyway, the girl, I'm gonna be calling her Seven from this point onwards. Seven is rescued from drowning by Jax. For a moment she is unresponsive, but then she comes to and attacks him. Okay, I'm already very intrigued by this sequence. According to the game's description, we're a brother and sister, and whilst some sibling hostility is to be expected, this, looks a lot more malicious. I wondered if maybe she's been here longer, so expected trouble, but there's an equal chance that this is because she knows who we are and based on that chose to throw hands. Still, she stops after a second and then speaks? I didn't know that was allowed. I confess I was a little worried about this because we've been here before. Bramble the Mountain King had constant narration which felt very hand-holdy. I know it was going for storybook and like I could kind of appreciate that, but the game was a lot better when the narration wasn't present. Then we also had Guilt, which was host to several voiced characters, which didn't add anything to the experience because all the dialogue was just kind of bad. I think it's all because of the implication. In a normal small child versus big scary world games, the kids are always quiet. At most they'll whisper to one another, but they're very keenly aware that the world hates them and wants to eat them, and any sound they make could spell their doom. It's unpleasant, it's sad, and it's a wonderful detail that serves to sell the world we're stuck in as inherently hostile to our very being. Luckily enough, Jax and Seven don't speak all that much. In fact, I think there are like about 6 at most times where any dialogue occurs, and it's all very very brief. They mostly just amount to, where are we? Dunno. I want to go home. Same. Yes, be in awe at my amazing character range. It builds some characters for the kids and makes them feel just a bit more out of place in this world, and you know what, I can kind of work with this. So, with Jax and Seven together and the implication that we clearly don't care for each other out there, we can move on. One thing said in their exchange was basically, where are the others? Which quickly sets up our objective. We're trying to find some other people. This is another departure from Little Nightmares, since whilst all three games have openings that hint at the ending, they don't actually tell you what these things are or what they mean, so we're just assuming that they're related to what our kid wants. Here, we clearly understand what the drive is. We want to find some other people, presumably our friends. The first area we explore on foot is a sort of rundown warehouse, factory, train station, train yard. I don't actually know. It has a vague industrial feeling to it, but I have no actual clue what it's supposed to be. The chapters in this game aren't named for their location, so who really knows? Here we find our first friend, either wearing a dunce cap or a KKK hood. I know there's not a whole lot of difference between the two. I'm gonna call them Remy. Remy tells us that we should get out whilst we can and disappears into the dark, obviously hoping that we won't follow. Great advice. Unfortunately, this is a horror game and our protagonists are so white they'd label whole milk as a spice, so naturally they're not going to make the good sensible decision to just leave. We track our friend for a time, evade some skin suits, use a mining cart thing. What are these called? Pumpers? Up and downers? Oh, hold on a second, I wrote it down. Hand cars. I won't lie to you, in the original script there was like a page of me just trying to figure out what these were called, because for some reason I just forget that I can Google things a lot. I'm not very smart, you should know that by now. Whilst we track our friend through the train yard, the sniffer rocks up and starts hunting for us. Oh no, he's deeply upsetting, but fortunately he's not amazingly perceptive and a bit single-minded. If he spots something that draws his attention, he kinda goes whole hog on chasing it, so we're able to sneak around him until to progress we need to move a train so that we can avoid falling in a murder hole. And I don't know if you noticed, listener, trains make noise. We do this, which leads to a chase across the roof of some other trains which are hanging over said murder hole, all very tense and exciting. We elude him for a time, take a stroll through the woods, avoid more skin suits, but then Sniffy comes back with his ice cream van, and following another chase where he shows he has all the driving skills of a coked up squid, he manages to capture Remy by offering them an ice cream cone and then snatching them. I can't tell if Remy was actually interested in the ice cream cone, or if they just know that leaping down to follow where we went would doom us all, because they'd effectively be showing Sniffy Bum that we went that away, so they just let themselves get captured, or maybe they're just more resigned to their fate. After all, they tried to convince us to get out of Dodge, or it was shock, I suppose that's an option too. Well, I guess we need to go and rescue them. That means following the road to a nearby city, and quick side note, these mannequins in this store, I was 100% sure they were going to try something. They didn't, thank the Empress, but I wasn't happy to be in the room with them. I kind of loved that they didn't do anything because that let my imagination run wild, although at the same time I'm a little bit disappointed that they didn't try to gut me. I know, I'm eternally unpleasable. We follow Sniffy Boy through a movie theatre which is showing this series of images on screen. I have to assume they relate directly to our protagonists, but even then they're vague. I think most of them are supposed to just be disturbing things we can see on the screen, but some of them definitely relate to us. I mean, there's a rabbit thing, and our girl here is wearing a rabbit mask, and one of those frames was the bunch of heads looking down the well, which, you know, hey, that happened at the intro, that must be relevant. It's intriguing, but I have no idea what most of it means, and I'm not a lore channel, so I'm not going to go diving too deep. I will just say that watching these again after I formulated my final theory for the game, I think I'm somewhat validated, but we'll get there. Eventually we find our friend locked in the back of a laundromat, and after we free them and evade the sniffer once again, we decide to just steal his van and take it for a joyride. I'm sorry, getaway. Of course we need to get some fuel first, and this leads to this wonderful scene of skin suits crawling out of every building as Sniffy Whiffy reappears to chase us once again. It's all sorts of unpleasant. We escape seconds before the skin suits can catch us, and everything seems like it's going okay until Sniff steps in front of the van and we have to beat him to death before the road ends abruptly and we crash. This leads to a cutscene. It's the well from the intro of the game, only now we can see what was at the bottom, a lamb, only it's not quite right. This immediately got me speculating on the nature of the game. My working theory was that these kids tortured and killed a lamb, then disposed of it in a well, this event serving as the catalyst for them winding up in this nightmarish afterlife where they are now the tiny helpless prey in the eyes of big large unfeeling higher beings. Of course I didn't think this was the whole story, but it was a start. Once this is done, we wake up back on the beach that we arrived at, and we can now sail elsewhere. Oh yeah, I forgot to show it, but we originally arrived at a beach and got off the boat and ascended to the factory place. Now we're back at the beach. Anyway, we can finally move onwards after we move this big gate thing. We make our way through a flooded town, narrowly avoiding some more skin suit monsters. Yeah, we needed more of those, thanks Reanimal. Also some sea mines. Luckily we find some harpoons so we can defend ourselves while we're at sea. I gotta admit, these are quite fun to use. Anyway, all's going well as we set sail again, only I find my way over here, a way that's not required for the game, but has a nice little secret. Well, nice is entirely the wrong word. Descending into it and opening this crate, we see a shadowy figure who looks a lot like Jax, only they're being hoisted into the air as if being hung. No, wait, the term is hanged if it's a person, isn't it? And Jax has a rope around his neck. I just thought it was a fashion choice, but this made me basically solidify the whole afterlife part of my theory. Again, I know the game's store page says we're going through hell, just I thought it was a metaphor. Now I think we're actually in the bad place. This perhaps means the kids were caught and killed by angry farmers or townspeople for what they did to the animal, but it's still too early to say for sure. In my first playthrough, I missed something in the first area. It's another one of these wooden boxes off to the side of the main path with a shadow who looked a lot like Remy, only they look like they're being shot. That getting killed for being evil little buggers theory is looking a little better, although I can't say that for certain. After all, this could just be your typical family-friendly murder. But this also told me that all of these kids definitely had their own box. So guess what I searched for in my second playthrough? Yep, all of them. I tried to find all of them. There was only one that wasn't accounted for by the end, but I don't know if that's because I missed it or because it doesn't exist. I'm pretty sure it's the latter, but we'll get there, don't worry. No, wait, this is a horror game, do worry. Anyway, this opening act was a great start to the adventure. It set up the mechanics that we can expect to use and the main gameplay loops of sneaking and running with the occasional vehicle and combat sequence for some variation. It also established a tone, that being bleaker than all of our collective futures. This entire world is drenched in a miserable atmosphere and I absolutely love it for that. I can't wait to see where we go next. As we continue to boat through the ruins, we see another kid waving at us who is then captured by the pelican monster and taken to a lighthouse, so we pursue. On the way we see a large sea monster that moves around and we pass by the big gun we're going to use to put it to sleep later. After coming ashore and beating up some seagulls, as if to live out the deepest desire of every tourist who's ever had their chips stolen, we then scale a cliff using ladders that would make Gilligan blush. Atop the cliff, a farm. A very creepy farm. There is something about vast fields that I find equal parts beautiful and unsettling. We make our way through, it's the only direction we can really move in. We meet some pigs in a barn that don't try to kill us. I mean, the big one does tell us to sod off, but it doesn't choose violence. That is interesting. Given how throughout the rest of the game we're going to be stalked by demonic nightmare animals, it's odd to see that some are happy to live and let live when it comes to us. Anyway, the lighthouse is nearby, so we head over and free our now caged friend. Let's not ask how the pelican put the kid in a cage. This angers Miss Pelican and we have to run away from her as a swarm of seagulls bears down upon us as if we're now holding the very chips that'll sustain their accursed existence. We hide in the barn, except this doesn't work. The pelican breaks in and the pigs do a runner, knocking over a lantern and igniting the place in the process. We then slam the doors closed and leave the bird to burn, along with the big piggy. Damn, in my mind I was like, oh, does this act represent how we condemned innocent creatures to death to serve our own wants in life, or maybe serve as a commentary for how we're happy to let others suffer if it means we get to live? Who knows? With games like these, they tend to operate on multiple levels, either this or I am just a snooty games at art pleb who likes to overanalyze stuff. I'll say this much though, that big pig would have saved itself a lot of trouble if it had just, you know, eaten us. We then head onwards to a bus stop as it starts raining. The kids take shelter and talk a little bit again, wondering how they got here and what's going on. Then 7 has what I'm going to politely call an episode. A memory seems to take hold of her of the lamb in the well, although it's framed as being particularly unpleasant. The lamb is moving and screaming, and all of this ends with 7 looking like this was physically taxing on her to recall. Yeah, fair, that's a lot to unpack. Any dream containing sheep is. At this point I was also appreciating how different 7 felt to Jax, Remy, and we haven't called bandaged head kid something, Toenail, we'll call him Toenail. They're all completely covering their heads, whereas she's only wearing a mask. They're all dressed in drab browns and greys. She's in a beaming white if slightly dirty dress. They all have shoes. She is barefoot. She's the odd one out, and this made me speculate. She was in the intro, but her head appeared last, and the colours began to shift when she appeared. She's obviously different. That memory being hers clearly says as much, and come to think of it, after the van crash memory bit, we cut back to her as if she'd been experiencing it before Jax reappears on screen. Was she not involved in the original act of nastiness that trapped the kids here? Was she maybe the real victim of their violence but wound up here as a cruel miscarriage of celestial justice? Or perhaps she's a test. Can she forgive them and in turn save them from torment, and can they work with her to survive and not leave her behind? Or maybe she's the real villain of the story here. Did she commit the crime and others killed her to try and balance out the karma? But when they were found killing the girl, they too were put to death by an emotional township jumping to conclusions and refusing to listen to them because they're children, and adults often do fail to understand their kids. I don't know, I really don't, but I'm excited to find out more and craft or update my theories as we go. This is why I love games like this so much. They give us plenty of hints, but let us put the pieces together however we can. Anyway, then a school bus pulls up and our kids gets in of their own accord. Okay, I admit this bit bugs me a little bit. I don't know why the bus driver entity is seen as being safe to be near. It feels a little bit contrived. Like the game needed us to get from one location to the next somehow and just picked whatever solution they could. Almost everything so far has wanted us either dead or suffering, so why we'd see a bus driver and think they're probably cool though is beyond me, and I don't love it. This is a fairly poorly thought out moment, and the weakest singular part of this entire game in my opinion. It's probably for the best that it happens just before the halfway point, because I almost forgot about it entirely. It's definitely better than something like this appearing at, say, the beginning or the end, where I'm more likely to remember it. Anyway, this takes us to the boarding school. At least I assume that's what there is. There's a lot of beds. The main type of enemy is children. I suppose it could be an orphanage. It's just that the bus we rode here in looked like a more classic school bus, so who can say for sure? Although I suppose sometimes they do bring kids home from school, so I don't know. The school section isn't bad. As a level, it is part of the Reanimal experience my brain largely skips over, but it's not a terrible section. The main monsters are these weird ash kids that come from a big spider monster who fear the light, although that's only really used as a mechanic a couple of times. It does have that cool maze bit, which is criminally underused, and the big boss is, as I said, the spider, which doesn't look as creepy as it could. If I'm being honest, this is where the game drops to being just alright. Of course, I'll still take just alright over being terrible. Regardless, one of our pals is here, being offered as a snack to the spider, so we have to do a rescue. This rescue goes about as well as one could expect when creepy ash children are crawling out of all of the walls to get us, and this sees our dynamic duo getting brained, tied up, and then lowered into the pit as the next sacrifice. Long story short, we wiggle ourselves loose and manage to escape our bonds after the creepy children grab at us, and accidentally pull the rope off. Okay, a little contrived, but less outwardly nonsensical than the bus driver bit. I should mention that our third friend here, I'll call them Motley, was eaten by the spider, so after a thrilling section of throwing harpoons at the thing, I don't mean that sarcastically, I did actually have a lot of fun with this. We then crawl into the spider's mouth and emerge with our friend in tow. Look, I love all my friends to pieces, but if you told me one of them was eaten by a giant spider monster and I had to now crawl into its gaping orifice to pull them out, I might just in that moment consider finding another friend, one that doesn't reek of giant spider guts. We then cut to us leaving the building to board some army trucks to progress. Again, I'm not sure why the idea of jumping in a random vehicle is seen as a good move, especially considering these ones are defended by soldiers with guns who will use them on us given the chance, and I'm convinced this little moron here should have gotten us caught. Oh well, at least we have all of our friends now and we can do something. Yeah, from here we're just sort of traversing the world. The next big story beat doesn't come for a little while, and if you asked, why are we heading in this direction, Reanimal would just sort of shrug at you and give the answer, because this is where the rest of the game is. During this truck section, 7 has another memory about the lamb in the well, this time a bit longer, and when it's done it was noticeably more distressing for her, and this moment only serves to further make her seem like the odd one out. I was more convinced that she was the victim of something rather than the perpetrator, but I have to admit that I have no real foundation for this. We weren't presented with any new information, it's just that she's obviously different from the others, and I have a tendency to identify with the outsiders. Anyway, the tunnel we're driving through suddenly collapses, and now we make our way to a military room of some sort, which allows us to solve the puzzle to make ammo happen for the giant gun. And then it's a short ride to the island, a quick firing of the gun, and now the sea beast is bested. I hope. I really hope. I don't want it to be a thing anymore. We then sail. Wait, is sail the right word? Because this boat doesn't have a sail. What do you call it when a boat doesn't have a sail? Is it still called sailing? That's not important. Boating. It's called boating. Why is that so hard for me, aside from the whole me being stupid thing? We then move our boat to the next location, which is a beached warship, where an eyeless whale blocks our way, so we do the only sensible thing, put on diving suits and go underwater to find a spare eye. Now, maybe that's not what the kids had in mind. Maybe it's more they're just looking for a way forwards and this route was an option situation, but whatever the motivation may be, it's an odd decision. This section to me is another sort of weak part because it feels the most like a random video game puzzle. But then again, we do get cool diving suits and the underwater part is very creepy, so it's not all bad. We do find an eye, by the way. By the looks of things, it belongs to the sea beast that we just, shot. The fact that we're about to steal its eye after murdering it is kind of insult to injury, although it might not be the same one, it could just be a close relative. Either way, like my grandpa always warned me, if you steal a sea monster's eye, it'll chase you and try to eat you. Anywho, we run, we narrowly escape. The thing grabs the cage that we were in, but it's okay because it seems to pull it on top of itself and I think it killed itself? I don't know. We give the whale the new eye, it moves out of gratitude, and we can proceed. Eventually, following a path through a ruined cityscape, we run ashore and make our way through some subway tunnels, then Seven has another memory episode. Cool, I hate it. Jax then starts carrying Seven as we follow the sheep, since forwards is the only direction we can really go, and we catch the horrific herd animal chowing down on Remy before disappearing into the dark. I would say it's weird that we continue to follow it after this point, but then again, we did save one of our friends from the stomach of a spider monster, so maybe we think we can do the same thing here. We follow it some more, which takes us across the war zone. This area feels 10 times bleaker than the rest of the game, largely because the soldiers are all killing themselves left, right and centre, but eventually we wind up finding the sheep, only the tables have turned and now we're running away from it. We wind up in a bunker. Motley Jackson 7 tried to shut the thing out with this hatch, but that doesn't work. It just kind of forces its way through and takes Motley into its maw. Well, this is kind of upsetting. We've spent the entire game trying to reunite with our pals, and now this spiteful woolly bastard is taking them all away. Before long, even our good friend Toenail is made into a meal. This is another moment where I'm not really sure what motive Jax and Seven have been left with. Either they're now looking to escape the realm following the death of all their friends, or they're hoping to exact some vengeance. Whatever the drive, we end up in a tank and take a few shots at Sheepy the Sheep, before appreciating just how large and grotesque it has become, and then we end up trying to pull the old skedaddle. It doesn't work. I think we're wounding the monster, but it seems that every act of violence we unleash upon it only makes it more powerful, and the final moments of the game after our tank gets cracked open and Jax gets eaten are spent moment as Seven briefly avoiding the demon. The game then cuts to a flashback of the other kids. They're doing some sort of ritual. Then we are Seven again, and now I think we're inside the sheep. We can call out, which causes the insides to shift so that we can proceed, and this lets us see Jax, Motley, Toenail and Remy entering a wooden building, all suspicious like. We enter the building to see a dead rabbit on the inside. We're then locked in, Seven goes into a panic and draws her knife, but this cuts to the four kids and we're Jax again, only now he's dragging what looks an awful lot like a human body behind him towards a well, and that hair looks very familiar. As we reach the well, surrounded by sheep, the kids look back at the body and then said sheep start standing upright. Okay, no, none of that, I don't want any of that, go away. Then the final scene of the game is Seven at the bottom of the well. Okay, a lot to deal with there. Seven seems to have been murdered by her brother and his friends. The sheep bore witness, and I'm guessing based on each of the secret scenes found throughout the game of them being offed, they were all eventually killed for their crimes. I'm now more convinced of my theory about the punishment/redemption side of things. I think the kids are in this hell because of Seven's death, and I think she's here because she cannot find peace until they atone for what they've done, and they can only be freed by acting selflessly and saving her where before they killed her. Whatever the case, they all ended up here, and cooperation was their only path to success. Notice how when the kids break up at the end, they all get picked off one by one. I think it's because they ran away. Maybe if they stayed together to make sure that Seven was alright, they would have been okay. Maybe the sheep would have just gone about its business. Maybe I was on the money when I suggested that the true path to victory to overcome the lamb was an act of peace rather than one of violence, since we tried the latter and it only made everything worse. Also, throughout the entire game, we occasionally just see this bright red flashing light, and I have no idea what it means. I think it might be the thing triggering Seven's, thingy-majigs. They all seem to occur at the same time, but then again, it could just be a style thing, it could just be a framing thing, it might not be anything more significant than that. I really don't know. I think there's a lot left in the air here, and I'm gonna have plenty of fun theorising on what it all means. I found the story to be really good. The middle part with the school and beach trip are kind of the weakest bits, but they're in the middle and it's easy to forget them, so it's not a big deal. Also, just so that I'm being clear, when I say they're the weakest, I mean relative to the rest of the game. They're still pretty good sections. The narrative starts off really strong. It gives us, through limited dialogue, an objective to find our friends, and the more progress we make, the more we see painful well flashbacks and notice the clear divide between Seven and the others. The ending is really intense and just ambiguous enough to leave some room to question the purpose behind the adventure and what really happened. If you're not really into ambiguity and don't vibe with stories that leave you wondering what it all means because it refused to tell you anything directly, then you probably won't gel with the narrative side of the game. It could just as easily be seen as a random series of nightmarish events starring 5 of the unluckiest children on the planet. I happen to really like this sort of thing, but I will admit that I can appreciate how it offers more narrative threads for us to follow, like how it presents the clear distrust between Jax and Seven, the unease all the kids seem to feel around one another, the way it designs its world to look more like a human world gone wrong, more so than Little Nightmares because the world still feels scaled to actual people. I also like that all of the monsters could reasonably be born from fears a child might have. The Sniffer is clearly the stranger they're taught to fear, the sea creature represents the fear of the unknown in the water because we can never get a full look at it. The pelican and the birds kind of remind me how I felt as a child being savaged by seagulls because I had the audacity to want to eat my rocket lolly in peace. Of course, the sea bit and the later Warzone also prey on adult fears of uncertainty and the ever-present dread that will be annihilated in a pointless conflict that wouldn't even need to arise if the world leaders could act more like adults rather than spiteful children. I really love how the world and monsters are being portrayed here. Everything is grotesque and broken and creepy and weird and absolutely perfect. I also like that we're not left entirely powerless, but we also get these moments where we see that kindness could be a path to success. So we begin to question if we needed to use aggression at all, that maybe there was a way to pass through this world leaving only footprints, although that might just be the overly idealistic part of me that naively believes we could all live in harmony if we'd only stop setting fire to each other. Reanimal is the Little Nightmares 3 that we all wanted, but also does enough to separate itself from just being another Little Nightmares game, and even if it didn't, I wouldn't entirely hold it against Tarsia, since Bandai Namco are holding the IP hostage. I swear, game publishers are like the second most worthless thing in the games industry. First place is basically a multi-way tie between shareholders, AI bros, asset flippers, and Bobby Kotick. Mechanically speaking, the gameplay is a fair improvement over what we've seen before, using the same basic setup with some wild cards thrown in, like vehicle sections for good measure, publisher, we've got an experience that does feel like a step up. Of course, it's all still kept relatively simple. These games aren't known for their deep and complex systems, but they're given enough extra parts to be interesting. There is a little part of me that would like to see a bit more development on this side of things, maybe use some more puzzles again, because like I said, I really like the maze puzzle that we got in the school section, and I wish we had more of that, but still I am happy with what I've seen. Compared to Little Nightmares, the story feels a lot more active, a lot more present, and it manages to conclude in a way that gives us some answers, but also remains vague enough on some of the details to allow us players to speculate. Overall, I think it's a really good game that only really weakens a little bit in the middle, not enough to warrant tossing it into the nearest murder hole, but I do appreciate the less interesting part not being towards the opening or closing moment, since those are the parts that are definitely going to linger more on my mind. They are the big bits that need to be done right, and Reanimal clearly understood this. The game is dark, it's unsettling, it's uncomfortable, it's a fantastic addition to this subgenre of horror, and I'm glad we got to wash the taste of Little Nightmares free out of our mouths. The game costs about 35 quid, which is a bit higher than I'd like, but then again, I've played through it 3 times, and I haven't felt the need to get my money's worth by complaining about the game, so I guess I can't be too cross. I would be happy to see some level-based DLC at some point, maybe to further flesh out the story, but as it stands, it's a really good game, and I don't feel bad about dropping my very limited money on it. Thank you for watching, my loves. I do hope you enjoyed the review. I had a very good time with this game, and it's been a genuine delight talking about it here. Sorry it took so long. Next time I am hoping to do Gravity Rush Remastered, but I've also been having quite a lot of fun with Thank Goodness You're Here, and I've put a lot of hours into Kingdoms and Castles lately, so let me know if you'd rather a video on a silly Gravity game, or the blocky medieval builder city game, or the aggressively British video game. I'll be happy whatever the choice. And yes, I have basically given up on making Prey one of those. I've played like the first hour over and over again, and I just can't get into it. I don't know what it is. There's just something about it. It just doesn't work for me. Take care, my loves. I really do appreciate you being here. Drink your water, take your meds, eat some pancakes, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you, bye.